Hello everyone, it's Mark from the Humaneity organisation today, and I wanted to make another video this morning, and today I wanted to talk about your strategy when it comes to being a podcast guest. So have a think about it for a minute. Have you actually even got a strategy when it comes to podcast? And do you know that podcasting today is the #1 growing form of online entertainment in the world? Yes, that's right. There's 30 million podcast episodes online today. And that means there's a huge opportunity for you to get your brand out to the world in a completely new and exciting way. But I want to warn you of a few things that I've learned during my podcasting journey, and they are things around protecting your brand. So the first thing is, do you want to be on every podcast show that you can possibly be on? And the answer for me is no, you don't. You want to make sure that you're aligning your brand to the right type of audiences and the right type of podcast. Let me give you an example. If you got interviewed on a specific TV show and they had a very strong political view against your political view, would it be necessarily a good thing for you to be on that show? Probably not, right? So same when it comes to podcasts. If you don't have an alignment to the audience that you're being interviewed for, then it's probably not going to be a good thing, because who's going to watch your show? So do your homework before you actually start off on your podcasting journey. Make sure you have a strategy. How many times a month, a year are you going to appear as a guest on a podcast show? What is your story going to be? Are you going to say the same old things all the time? I've had a number of guests come on my show and the messaging is the same. I listen to them on other podcast shows, the messaging is the same. So think about what you're actually sharing and think about how often you're doing that. That's really, really important. And I think also the other thing you need to consider is doing your homework on the podcast platform itself. So find out how many listeners they've got, where are their listeners, who are their listeners, how are they going to distribute your episode, who's it actually going to get to in the end of the day. You might get off the show and feel fantastically great about being a guest, but it may not get heard by anybody. So make sure that your podcast is going to get heard. Make sure also that your brand is protected. Make sure the person or the organization that's creating the podcast is going to represent your brand in a very professional way. And what I mean by that is making sure that the way they put out your marketing material fits into the way that you present your brand. So there's a lot of things around consideration that you need to do in terms of becoming a guest on a podcast show and having a podcast marketing strategy. Once you've done the podcast, also get some feedback on how the podcast actually performed. I'm really surprised at the number of guests that I have on my show. Hardly any of them come back and say, how well did the podcast actually do? How many people listened to it? Where were the people listening to it? And it shows to me that people are really in the, embryonic stages of understanding how podcasts work and finding out how much information that there is there, or not knowing, basically having a lack of information about the podcast industry. It's an incredibly exciting industry. It's growing so rapidly. A lot of huge brands around the world are hopping on podcasts now. They're creating their own podcast, and therefore it creates a huge amount of opportunity for you to get your brand to a global audience. So there you go, a few tips for you on how to have podcast strategy, how to make sure you do the right things when it comes to getting your brand out there on podcast. I hope it helps you today. Have a fantastic day. I'll be back again soon with another video.